People still joining, but I think we'll get started there. So, morning everybody, my name's Zopash and I'm on the marketing team here at Bridgell. I just wanted to thank you all for joining us for our Idea to Application Power App session. We're glad to see you here with us this morning. So just a quick note before we get started. So the session is being recorded and we just want you to know that we'll be sending out a copy of this recording after the event. So if there's anything that you want to catch up on, you can do, or if there's anybody that couldn't make it and you want to share it with them, you can do that later on as well. You'll notice that you're on mute at the minute, but we do encourage you to use the chat function to ask any questions that you do have, and we'll do our best to answer them throughout the session. And we do have a section near the end of the session where we'll take all your questions then. So that's main points covered. So what I'll do now is I'm going to hand over to our team of experts, Graham, Josh and Charles, who will be taking you through the session. So thanks so much and we hope you enjoy the session. Thank you.
Morning everyone, thanks Zopash. So yeah, thanks for joining us today for the Idea to Application Power Apps webinar. Today we're going to go through an overview of Power Apps and just what it is. We're going to look at different types of Power Apps. We're going to look at what's the difference between model driven and what's the difference between Canvas apps as the kind of main two ones, maybe touch a wee bit on some of the other options as well. And then we're going to have a look at some real life use cases and demos as well. We'll touch a wee bit on licensing at the end. And then we've got a kind of question and answer session at the end. First of all, I'm Graham McLean. So I head up the modern workplace practice at Bridgell. And I'm joined today by two of my team, Charles Sexton and Josh Giles, both senior members of the team. They're kind of Power Apps experts, if you like, and they'll be going through the main detail of the presentation today. Just to echo what Zopash was saying at the start, if you've got any questions on the way through, then please raise these in the chat window, and I'll try and pick up any questions in the chat as we go along, as the guys are presenting. And then when we get to the end, if there's any other questions there, then we'll pick them up in the Q&A session as well. Okay, so first of all, just a wee bit of introduction about Bridgell. We're based in Glasgow, head office in Glasgow, 40 staff at the moment and growing. Established in 2002, so actually celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. We've got a couple of things planned this year to kind of mark that occasion as well. We work across a number of different pillars. So we've got the modern workplace practice, as I've mentioned earlier, that I head up. We also, so that looks after things like Dynamics CRM, Power Apps, Power Platform and SharePoint. Effectively all the Microsoft platforms kind of fit underneath that pillar, if you like. We then have the managed IT services and support function. So they look after work such as migrations to the cloud, moving all your infrastructure to Azure, managed IT support, supporting desktops, firewalls, laptops, etc. And also the infrastructure around Microsoft 365 as well. Then we've got our analytics and applications practice, and that really looks at kind of custom development, as well as things like Power BI, building out data platforms, looking at a wee bit of AI as well. And then finally, we've got a specific product in the water sector, which really is to do with kind of settlements and billing around the water industry as well. Across all the different pillars, we advise, so we can get involved early, advise on the best options, advise on things that you might be looking at. We can help you implement the best and the most cost-effective solutions. And we also provide support, so we can provide ongoing IT and solutions support as well. We're a 10 times Microsoft Gold partner, and also moving to the new partner ecosystem over the next kind of couple of months as well. We heard a little bit about that, moving across to a different, so there'll be no such thing as a gold partner any longer. So we're moving on to the new system within the next couple of months as well. We're also a Microsoft Content Services preferred partner. We're one of only 26 worldwide Microsoft partners with that status. And really what that does is gives us access to the Microsoft engineering team for things like SharePoint, Microsoft Syntex, Microsoft Viva, so some of those new platform technologies that are coming up, really letting us understand what the roadmap is and where that solution is headed as well. So it's really good to get that insight from Microsoft and be able to kind of shape the product in some small way as well. We're also ISO 9001 and ISO 27001 certified as well. And then just some of our customers. So as you'll see from the logos there, we work across both the private and the public sector across a number of industry verticals. So we've got some manufacturing, some housing, national government, NHS, utilities, etc. in there as well. So quite a wide variety of customers and quite a wide variety of sectors, which just helps kind of everyone in the team have that understanding of all the different challenges that these different sectors and different kind of verticals are facing. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand over to Josh to present the first part of today's session. Just a reminder that feel free to post questions in the chat, and as I say, I'll pick up any responses that I can as we go along. So without further ado, I'll just hand over to Josh to take you through the first part.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. Hi, everyone. Hope you're all well. My name's Josh. I'm a solutions architect at Bridgel. So just to get started, there will be a poll popping up at some point, which I encourage you all to answer, just some questions to kind of gauge where you're at with Power Apps. To give a quick overview of Power Apps, they allow you to build apps quickly and easily without using any code, but you can use low code if you want to as well. You can easily access your data with data connectors, standard or custom ones, depending on your data type. And when you're ready, you can quite easily publish and share your apps with users, either on the web or through the mobile devices. So moving on to the types of Power Apps. Firstly, we have model-driven apps, which are driven by data and a component-focused approach to app development. However, they are kind of restricted to predefined layouts and components. So you bring the data and the app is kind of laid out for you. It's the same model as Dynamics 365. So if you've used Dynamics in the past, the CRM apps and customer engagement applications are built on this platform as well. And yeah, you define the data model. So in a scenario where the data model and the relationship are important, then this is probably the route you're going to want to take. And then just a kind of example of what they look like there as well. We've got Scotland's House and Network as an example here. We're actually using them as a demo today, so we'll get a little bit more kind of insight into that in a minute. Moving on to handing over to Charles now, who will be able to go over the next type of apps with you.
Thanks, Josh. Hello, everyone. I'm Charles Sexton. I'm a senior Power Platform consultant / developer for Bridgel. So talking about Canvas apps, a Canvas app it's in the name. You start off with a blank canvas generally, and you'll build upon that however you like. You get a lot of freedom. There are some templates that are available from Microsoft. However, many of them aren't maintained and a lot of them aren't using best practices. So I just advise being careful with which templates you would use. So generally, you will start off from scratch with a Canvas app. You can design the app without needing any code. However, you'll quickly find that there are limitations to that as soon as you start using slightly more complex data relationships, or the interface might need to be somewhat complex. So it's more likely that you'll require a little bit of code at least, whereas with model-driven apps, you won't necessarily need any code at all. And where model-driven apps generate the interface, Canvas apps are a completely blank canvas where you have the freedom to design it however you like. So it does have support for the web, for tablets and for mobiles. However, you'll need to put in the effort to cater for those. It does mean that they're very powerful, but it also means that they're generally slower to develop on than model-driven apps. So when you're deciding what to use, you have to weigh up the pros and cons and think about what type of app you're trying to create, not only now, but also what future features you might want to implement. So I'll go through a couple of examples very quickly, but we'll go into them in more detail later. This was a proof of concept app for managing regulatory staff registrations for key housing. They are a registered social landlord who provide housing to adults and young people who have disabilities and long-term needs. So what they needed was an app that would manage their staff's regulatory registrations to ensure that they're meeting requirements. Another example is a sustainability reporting app that we created for Whyte Mackay. If you're not aware of Whyte Mackay, they're a company mostly known for making whiskey products. The app that we created for them is actually incredibly complicated, but because we had freedom over the design, we were able to break it down into smaller, more manageable sections using a tabbed interface and showing and hiding different elements. And there was also a lot of specific functionality that would have been more difficult to achieve using a model-driven app. Things like having collapsible nested items and comparisons of products. So again, it depends on your use case as to what type of app you would decide to use, but both are very good for what they do. So now we'll move on to the real life use cases and demos, and back to Josh.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. So yeah, we just want to show some real life use cases of these types of apps. So first we've got Scotland's Housing Network. So Scotland's Housing Network work across the housing sector in Scotland. They manage a large number of clients as a result. They were using Excel spreadsheets to manage this information, and it was becoming difficult to keep it all in sync and up to date. So they reached out to Bridgel for a solution. And we implemented a model-driven app for them. So I'm going to just run you through what that looks like and just walk you through it. So let's get this. Okay. So yeah, we've got a model-driven app here. It's the member management app. And when they actually launch the app, they get a kind of simplistic dashboard just to give them some key metrics based on the data that's in the app. When we look at the left here, this is a navigation menu. We've got some out-of-the-box kind of tables that we've used, such as accounts and contacts, which I'll go over in a second. We've also got quite a lot of custom elements in here as well, such as website management, as the system ties in to their website. Event management as well, which manages events for them through the website. And then we've also got things like marketing to help them manage mail shoots and all marketing activities. So if we look at accounts firstly, when we go into accounts, we get this fairly standard view, which is a list of records. And you'll notice this is a common theme throughout a model-driven app with these views, as you always get a kind of firstly a list of records. And then if I click into the accounts, we've got Bridgel set up here as a demo. And we then get presented with what's called the forms. And this is the more kind of intricate details of that account. So, you know, we can see kind of key information about it, such as the contacts that relate to that account, you know, membership information, any correspondence as we track emails through the system. Yeah, things like primary contacts as well. And when we look at contacts, which is kind of the next level down from accounts, again, if I click into that, you can see it's the same, very similar view, just different information there. And you can see that, you know, my name's configured there. I belong to Bridgel as a company. And if I go into my name, it's the same view as well, just with different information on the form. And again, you can see key information such as correspondence that I've had with the company, any kind of communities of practice that I belong to, which is a kind of key kind of informational piece for Scotland's House and Network, any events that I've registered to, that kind of stuff. So I can really quite quickly and easily get the data that I need out of this system. But it's very easy because the data is already there for me. I've brought the data in, the app's been built for me. I just have to customize what I want to see. So the next one is website management. So these will tie into the website. So membership inquiries is the first one. So on the website, there's a form that users will fill in to inquire about membership. That actually creates a record here when they hit submit for Scotland's House and Network to deal with. And then the second one is web login requests. So when accounts become members, they get basically access to the website, and to do that, they need to sign up. They will fill in another form, which creates a record here, and then Scotland's House and Network will go through the list of people that have signed up, and then we'll create an account for them. We've actually got a bit of a kind of customized, it's called command bar, this along the top here, but we've actually customized that so that when they've populated the organization, they can convert it to a contact and create a web login for this user that's signed up. So they've automated that part of the process as well, which saves Scotland's House and Network quite a bit of time. Next we've got event management, and that's so they add their events here, that gets synced across to the website. They then make that event live, and then when users register to that event, they basically get added to this CRM system as a registration, and it ties in the contact and the event, so you can quite easily track event registrations. And then lastly, we'll just cover marketing here. So we've got things like marketing lists, which allow Scotland's House and Network to build out lists of marketing for contacts or accounts, and they can be dynamic, which means that they're always kept up to date based on fields in the CRM, or we've got static if it was like a one-off thing where they just actually manually add members. By and large, we find that dynamic's the mostly used one. And then email templates, so rather than having to then compose an email every single time, we've got templates in here for them to use so that they can use them in their campaign activities, which leads us on to campaigns, which is basically almost like a container where they can add in their marketing lists, the email template, and then send that out as a mail shoot as required. You'll notice at the bottom here, the stuff related to like table management emails as well. That's just kind of more kind of system configuration stuff as well. So if I stop sharing now and come back to the slides. So now we move on to our next case study, which is Dalmore Capital. So Dalmore Capital already using a Canvas app-based application, but they're using SharePoint as their back end for the data storage. It was working great, but they were kind of starting to feel the limitations of SharePoint. So they reached out to Bridgel, and we ended up developing a new model-driven app for them, which was a lot easier to use and a lot more efficient for Dalmore. So we've got a quick demo of that as well, which I'm just going to bring up. Okay, so yeah, this is the Dalmore Distillery app, and you'll notice straight away this is a very similar interface to what we've just witnessed for Scotland's Housing Network, but actually the data contained within it is very different. You'll notice down the left, it's a completely customized, different set of kind of areas, but the view and everything kind of is very similar, just with different data. So we've got a kind of a section here for investment management. So that's management of funds, deals, assets that are owned, investor transactions, that kind of thing. And what we notice as well is the interface does look slightly different. So model-driven apps is going through a bit of kind of modernization at the minute. So some of the interfaces are being updated with a new kind of design system, which makes it look a lot more kind of sleeker and a bit more kind of in line with the rest of the Microsoft's offerings. And again, if we go into one of these, you'll see very much a kind of similar thing. We've got a form here, quite a lot of fields on this one. We've kind of split out into sections to make it a little bit more manageable. We've also got a customized command bar on the top here. So when records get added, they go into a draft status, and they have to go through an approval process. So to manage that, we've actually got like this is called a custom page, which is actually like a Canvas app within a model-driven app, which opens up in the context of the model-driven, which is quite nice because it brings the two kind of a bit more closer together. And then they're able to request approval through here, which will actually trigger a Power Automate workflow. And yeah, elsewhere on the app, we manage like company data through this corporate tab, and also kind of the corporate related assets and the corporate related funds, and this is all relational data as well. So when we look into here, you'll notice that there's things like related directors, related funds and assets. So the data is all relational, and that's where model-driven apps is really good in being able to kind of show those relationships. And lastly, we've got contact information, which just holds simple records, which is then used throughout the app in other records as lookups. So I'll just open the slides again now. And I'll hand over to Charles, who's going to go over the next demo.
Thanks, Josh. Okay, so these are two examples that I talked about in very small detail previously, and we'll go into more detail now. The first one is for Whyte Mackay, which was the sustainability reporting. One of the main reasons for needing to create this app was to meet the requirements for the extended producer responsibility, which is basically where producers bear responsibility for the environmental impacts of the products they place on the market. So this is recording what types of materials make up their products, how recyclable they are, that kind of thing. So the data that we were using initially came from Whyte Mackay's core SQL database, and we've copied that data using a data flow over to Dataverse, which is the Power Apps backend. So what we're then doing within the app is we're building upon that data in order to store their packaging attributes, which are things such as recyclability and the weights of components. We also implemented the ability to store accreditations for each component. For example, if it's FSC accredited, and those files are stored in a SharePoint document library, which we can access from within the app. So this shows the extensibility of Power Apps and the compatibility with other parts of the Microsoft ecosystem. And then off of the back of this app, we also have produced Power BI reports that give all of the data needed to meet those regulatory requirements and also to go beyond that, because it means that Whyte Mackay can use that data to help them reuse the components for new products, where in the past it would have been difficult to pinpoint those components. They already have plans for extending the system as well, including a new Power Pages project, which would be to obtain data directly from Whyte Mackay suppliers. So as is always the case with Power Apps, once you start to see the benefits, you start to think of so many other ways that the platform can provide value. So now I'll give you a demonstration of this app. So this is the Whyte Mackay Sustainability Reporting app. What we're looking at here is a SKU search screen, which is essentially where you're searching for products. So what Whyte Mackay will do is they will look for the product in question, and then once they've opened that product, they'll see what's called a bill of materials, which is essentially a list of components that make up that particular product. So if it's a case of whiskey bottles, within the bill of materials, you'll have the individual whiskey bottles. And then within those whiskey bottles, they will be made up of a label, cork, and other bits and pieces. So all of that information is contained within this system. And where I was talking about before about how the interface can be quite complex and you might need things like collapsing and nested parts, all of that was contained within this. So what we can do here is let's have a look at one of the labels. And you can see the attributes that we're storing for it. And we're storing a huge number of records here, a huge number of attributes. And the way that this is made possible and simpler through a Canvas app is that we've used a tabbed interface to show and hide different elements. So we've tried to simplify what is incredibly complex. So within this, Whyte Mackay can specify whether or not components are imported, what materials they're made up of, how recyclable they are, what they weigh, all of those different details. There's also the ability within here to store files against everything, whether it's a SKU, whether it's a component, or whether it's a supplier, and the files that get saved in here will get stored in a SharePoint document library. We also have versioning that we implemented. So if we're again looking at the component, we can see that this one's been published. We've got different versions. We can save drafts. And we're also bringing through versioning from Whyte Mackay's own system. We've implemented the versioning at the component level, but within their database, they have versioning at the SKU level. So we're importing that information and we can look through the different versions of their products. The other feature that we have is for all of the searches, we have implemented the ability to export it to Excel, and that's across the SKUs and the components. So when the component is exported to Excel, all of the information that they've saved for the attributes gets saved in that spreadsheet and it gets sent to them in a message through Teams. So again, it's just really good integration across the Microsoft products. I'll move back to the slides now. So the second project that I'm going to talk about was the key housing one. This was a proof of concept and it was built over the course of 2 weeks in order to demonstrate the capabilities of Power Apps. So in order to create this, we needed to absorb data from several spreadsheets that Key Housing provided to us. Their current situation is that they're manually processing those spreadsheets and information can be missed. Also, no history is retained because they overwrite those spreadsheets with new ones and they lose the old data. So we're able to demonstrate how we can keep track of those staff registrations and we can retain the staff history. And we have the ability to filter the list down to exactly what each department needs. We also set up scheduled notifications to email monthly reports to management using Power Automate, which is going to save them a huge amount of time because currently that's a manual process. So the plan for this proof of concept now is to integrate it with a Dynamics 365 human resources implementation, which again shows that Power Apps can slot into your organization to tackle a problem. So I'll now give you a demo of that app. So this is the Key Housing app. We're looking at a member of staff here and we can see any historic information that we store against them. We can see what current applications they have, what registrations they've had, which member care service they work with, what their national insurance number is, when they started working. and we have a full staff listing that we can go to, and we can filter it by name. And then we can go to the applications. We can see which applications are ongoing, which ones are rejected and in progress, and so on. And then if we're talking about registrations that they currently have, maybe we want to look at all of the overdue annual fees, so we can see which staff are currently overdue on their payments. So Canvas apps provide the ability to decide what you want to show and how you want to show it. As you can see across the two apps, we've branded them according to those organizations. It really is a case of you can design anything you want with these. You can do advanced filtering. All of this information originally was in spreadsheets, and it's now in Dataverse, which means that we have strong relationships between all of the entities. Another feature that we implemented is that when you view a member of staff, it stores that on the left-hand side, so you can quickly go back to that member of staff. And I'll go back to the slides. So next up is what's new in Power Apps, and I'm going to talk about one thing in particular, which is something that's been very popular across the world at the moment, which is artificial intelligence. Microsoft have introduced something called Power Apps Copilot, which is essentially where you can tell Copilot what you would like it to create, and it will create it. However, it is quite limited because it's in the early stages. What it can do so far is it can generate a Dataverse table, it can populate that table with data, and then it can create a single page app. So you're not going to be able to get it to create something complex at the moment. It will create something that is very simple. It does create a responsive app, which is very nice. So what you could do is you could use this as a starting point for creating your app. But unless you understand what it's created, it's going to be quite difficult to build on top of that. Copilot isn't anywhere near being able to create complex applications, but what we can see is that it's going to be able to help with productivity benefits soon. So you can describe to it the table that you want it to create and then populate it with sample data. Populating with sample data is something that's been quite cumbersome in the past. So it's a very interesting technology, but it's still got a long way to go. And there's not really too much that you can do with it today. Next up, I'm going to talk about licensing. I saw someone mention that in the chat. So Power Apps licensing is broken up into 3 different categories. Essentially, you can have a per app plan, a per user plan, or a pay-as-you-go plan. So what you need to consider with Power Apps initially is that if you're creating a Canvas app, if you're using standard connectors, there's no additional licensing needed. You'll only need that licensing once you're using a premium connector, such as Dataverse. So if you're using a Canvas app with SharePoint as your data source, there's no licensing needed. So that's fine for small amounts of data and for simple apps, but at some point you'll probably reach some limitations if you're creating something a bit more complex, and you'll most likely need to move over to something like Dataverse. If you're creating a model-driven app, then you will need a license because model-driven apps are based upon Dataverse. As Josh showed earlier, you can embed a Canvas app screen in a model-driven app. And if you do that, it doesn't contribute to the cost. You're just paying for the license for the model-driven app. So what you need to do is you need to consider how many apps and how many users and how often those apps are going to be accessed. If you just have the one app in your organization, then you're going to be looking at the per app plan. If you're looking at a number of apps, say you have 4 or more apps that people are regularly using, you'll be looking at the per user plan. And then if you've got some apps that are intermittently used, perhaps they're only accessed once or twice a year, then you'll be looking at the pay-as-you-go plan. So I'll pass back over to Graham or Zopash, perhaps, for questions.
Great. Yeah. Thanks very much, Charles. And thanks very much, Josh. Yeah, so just want to kind of open the floor. I've had a couple of questions through the chat. just about the licensing and about different models as well. But feel free to post the questions into the chat, and I can field that. Or I'm not sure if you can raise your hand and maybe give a question as well. Zopash can probably manage that for us. So a couple coming through the chat there. Instead of Dataverse, can you use SharePoint lists or store Excel spreadsheets in SharePoint that can be updated via the Power App front end? So you can use SharePoint lists to build out a Dataverse application. You can build a reasonably kind of complex Dataverse application. Sorry, Power Apps application. You are just really bound by SharePoint, I feel like, in terms of the number of lists and the number of lookups that you can do. So you've got a volume of data that SharePoint lists can hold, which is quite a lot now. What SharePoint lists are not very good at is doing that kind of multi-relational lookup. So you can get away with maybe a couple of different lookups to different lists and holding the data at that point. But you will reach a threshold where actually you just need to go to Dataverse. You need to go to something that is more, kind of SQL Server, like something that's a bit more enterprise, which is the back end for it as well. The next question, probably fairly related to that. So what's the difference between Dataverse and using SharePoint data sources? So just as I was saying there, Dataverse, you can think of that as more akin to a SQL Server. Effectively, Dataverse is what Dynamics CRM operates on. That's where Dynamics CRM stores its data now, and effectively it is Microsoft SQL Server with a bit of a layer on top as well. SharePoint, obviously, you've got some of the column types, you can do some of the lookups, but as I said, you're fairly limited in terms of your lookups to other data. Okay. Question from Robert there. So is there a trial of free-based subscription in order for you to experiment with Power Apps? There is. So you can go and sign up for like a developer tenant for Power Apps, and that will give you a license that you can go and create all your Power Apps. You can use Dataverse. Effectively, you get the kind of premium connectors for your user for free as well, and that's for one user. So you can go and have a look and have a play about with that. We'd highly recommend that to kind of go and see what's possible with it. There is a limitation that it is one user only. So when you come to kind of testing applications and things, it's maybe not the best, but it's really good for getting in and exploring what the framework and what our platform can do. Okay, the next question there may be one for you, Charles. So for the demo and key housing, is the data connected to a back-end application? Is this something that the user creates on the app, like new renewals?
Yeah, so the data is stored in Excel spreadsheets that in the proof of concept, they get saved in SharePoint, and then the information is extracted from those spreadsheets and stored in Dataverse. And what we can do with the fully fledged system is that we can take that data from perhaps an API instead, but we can continue to take it from Excel. And then there'll be a link between that Dataverse database and Dynamics 365. So talking about renewals and things like that, that information would just flow through from those spreadsheets that are provided by the regulatory organization.
Great, thanks. And Jacques, so if you have Dynamics CRM, do you still have to pay for a subscription plan? So if you have Dynamics CRM licenses already, then you can build some Power Platform solutions around the. Basically, they've got what they call reserved entities in Dynamics CRM, and they're the ones that you're effectively paying for with the license. So you can make use of those reserved entities in a Power Platform solution, and you can use certain connectors. But there are some circumstances where you might need to pay for like a per app plan or something as well. It depends what you're doing. I would say that's maybe a slightly more kind of complicated use case. And I think if you want to, discuss your scenario or whatever further, then be happy to have a chat to you about your particular scenario and what you might need around there to help you out. One from Mark. So how powerful is the graphing and reporting capabilities in Power Apps, or can you link a Power App to Power BI for reporting? Charles or Josh, do you want to take that one? Save me from answering all the questions.
Sure, I can take it from the Canvas app perspective, and then perhaps Josh can take it from the model-driven app perspective, because it's slightly different between the two. So with a Canvas app, there are some built-in charts that you can create that are quite basic, but you can also include Power BI tiles inside of a Canvas app. So you can essentially import your Power BI tiles into a Canvas app.
Yeah, and from the model-driven side, you can basically embed the report, much like in the Scotland's Housing Network demo, that first kind of overview screen, it would be very similar to that, but rather than using kind of out-the-box charts and graphs, it would be Power BI reports that you see. But yeah, they're very tightly integrated across the kind of Microsoft landscape, really.
Thanks. One from Rebecca. So does it integrate with Microsoft Forms? So yeah, we've built a couple of kind of solutions that have Microsoft Forms as the front end. What tends to happen is that data will get routed using Power Automate into a SharePoint list, and then you could absolutely build a Power Platform solution on top of that SharePoint list to kind of surface that data, to manipulate that data and do whatever you need to do with that data. I think if you want to go a bit further than the Microsoft Forms bit, so if you want to have effectively external users not just being able to submit forms, but being able to kind of interact with the data in some way, so maybe they put some data in, that comes back into the organization, they do a bit of work, that goes back out to the customer, and they need to add more information, then that probably takes you on to one of the other Power Platform offerings. It probably takes you onto Power Pages, which effectively is a portal which uses the same data, but is for people like external to the organization. It lets you create kind of web type experiences that users can interact with the data. They can log into the experience, they can get accounts, they can understand where they are in a process, and they can understand what's happening with their data within the organisation as well. Okay, what's the limitation of Power App with the E3 license of Microsoft? What license do we need to be able to fully explore Power App capabilities? So yeah, this is quite a common question because the licensing here can be a wee bit tricky. So actually with the E3 license, you are able to go and use Power Apps without any problem. It's all about the connectors. So you could take data from an Excel spreadsheet, you could take data from a SharePoint list, you could do all that with the E3 license. It's when you move to using things like the premium connectors, so using Dataverse, using SQL Server, starting to use API connections and things like that, anything that you need a premium connector for. And it's the tricky bit here is it's not to do with the E3 and the E5 licensing. There's actually no difference between the Power Apps capabilities really in there. It's more to do with whether you need a per app plan or a per user plan for Power Apps. So if you want to start using the premium connectors, you need to move into a kind of per app licensing model or a pay-as-you-go type licensing model to be able to use those connectors. So question from Ed, are Power Apps the tool to use to create a simple project management tool, or are there templates available that can be adapted? So you could do, again, it depends what you want to try and build out from there. You could absolutely do something like that in SharePoint, using SharePoint lists to a certain extent. If you want to do something that was a bit more complex, then you could obviously take that to Dataverse as well. But there is really good integration across, as Charles had mentioned, some of the solutions that we've built across into SharePoint, across into kind of SharePoint lists, Microsoft Forms, Teams, right across the Microsoft 365 platform. So it's a really good platform to kind of go and build solutions like that, because it integrates with lots of different points that you need through a kind of project management journey as well. In terms of templates, I don't know, it's maybe one for Josh or Charas if they've seen anything. I'm not aware of anything that I've seen, but that doesn't mean there's not.
Yeah, there'll undoubtedly be some templates, but the problem that I always find with the templates is that they tend to be dated because Power Apps move so quickly. So often when you open them up, you see that there are a load of errors in the app already. So yeah, I'd move with caution on those things.
And then, yep, so we use Microsoft 365 Business Basic licenses. Will that allow me to use Power Apps with SharePoint lists? And then can you surface Power Apps in Microsoft Teams? So I'll answer this second one first. So you can surface Power Apps in Microsoft Teams. You can effectively create a Power App in Microsoft Teams. There is a kind of exception, if you like, to the license where you can create a Dataverse Power App in Microsoft Teams without needing any of the kind of pair app licenses. So that's covered under the kind of E3, E5 licensing. And that can be used within that team. There is also a way, it's not the easiest, but there is a way to kind of share that with other people. But it's not the kind of full Power Platform experience. And yeah, absolutely, you can create a Power App using things like SharePoint data and Microsoft List data in Microsoft Teams as well. So you'll see if you go into Microsoft Teams, you'll see there's the option to kind of add Dataverse or add Power Apps, sorry, and then the first time you add Power Apps into that environment, it'll take you a while to spin up, and then subsequently to that, you can just add Power Apps into Teams as you require. On the Business Basic licenses, I would need to go and check that one for you. I don't want to say it is covered and it's not, but I think there is a split. So with E3, E5, you definitely have that kind of Power Apps with SharePoint lists. I just need to go and double check that for you with the Business Basic. Okay, one for you, Josh, I think, is the use of the Centre of Excellence required/recommended should you wish to promote citizen/non-ICT development within an organisation?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend it as a starting point if you're on a kind of Power Apps journey, or Power Platform journey even, because it sets the kind of landscape up really, and it makes sure that you're kind of following good practices and you've got a really good kind of holistic overview of everything that's happening within your environment. So yeah, it's a really good tool to have and valuable tool to have. We actually offer a service, a quick start that can help with that as well if that's something you're wanting to explore. But yeah, definitely something to look into if you're starting on that Power Platform journey as well.
Great, thanks. And then if Power Apps created, is there a lot of work to keep it up to date? So want to convince the team to move from spreadsheets to something more useful. So I guess this kind of comes in a wee bit into the citizen development, a wee bit into the previous question. So there's a couple of different development models, around having somebody effectively builds the solution, or a group of people build the solution. So I don't know how how the users that are potentially going to use this project management solution are kind of placed, but if you have one person who can build it and then make people aware about what the solution does, then they could kind of tinker around the edges with some of the configuration and things like that. But where it comes to changing it, you want to obviously try and funnel that through a bit of a more formal kind of change process. You get away if it's a small group of people with it being a wee bit more informal in terms of, I've changed that and now works like this. But with all development, as you get to, a kind of bigger solution, you want to try and funnel that through a bit of a kind of change process so that everyone knows what's being changed and they agree that the change is right. They're not introducing any kind of regression and any bugs as well. So it's a wee bit more about the kind of development model, but it's certainly doable. In terms of keeping it up to date, again, it would depend on how much the data changes over time. So if you've got things like configuration values or lists and things like that, you don't want to keep them separate. You may have a SharePoint list that you add things to from time to time, and then they could absolutely appear in the app without any user kind of development, if you like, just adding the values onto the list. And so it just depends how you set that Power App up so that you can enable things like that instead of locking that into the code, really, so that the solution has to be changed before that could be changed. Okay, good. A flurry of questions there at the end. I think we've certainly got through all of them, I think, on the chat. If there are any other questions that you've got you think of just now, feel free to post them onto the chat. I think we've got another kind of couple of minutes. If there's no more questions, then we'll probably finish up there. So I'll just hand back to Zopash just to finish up and round up.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Graham. I want to say a big thank you to Graham, Josh and Charles for a really informative session. We know what it's always like. If you've got questions later on that you think of, please don't hesitate to contact us and we'll do our best to answer them later on. So we just want to thank you for joining the session today, and we hope you found it useful. And we'll be sending you a copy of the recording and the slides soon. So if you do have any questions in the meantime, do send us a message on contact@bridgel.com. We also have some other events coming up a bit further in the year. One on Azure Virtual Desktop, so if that's something that you might be interested in, please do have a look at our Eventbrite page, which we'll send you along. But yeah, no, thank you so much again for joining us, and we hope to see you at the next Bridgel event. Thank you so much.